In January of 1961, President John F. Kennedy dramatically changed relations in Central and Latin America when he decided to cease recognition of the Cuban government. For over 50 years, the United States and Cuba did not formally recognize each other, nor did they formally acknowledge each other through international exchange or international trade. This all ended with the Obama administration, July 20th of 2015. Hello, my name is Sean Williams, and I'm here with the senior seminar class, Campbellsville University of 2015, as part of their ongoing project concerning international, domestic, and economic relations in the United States and around the globe. Today, our topic of conversation is normalization of trade and diplomatic exchange between Cuba and the United States. I'm here with my panel of guests, Joseph Lowe, Jacob Lee, Lucas Pennington, and Sierra McGinnis. Today, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the history of the Cuban and American normalization and a little bit about what's changed and why. So to start off with, let's begin by looking at the causes of the tensions between the United States and Cuba. Anybody want to get us started?
I will. Okay, so to begin with, Cuba from the get-go has had a cyclical change in its government as far as dictators and diplomatic leaders. And where the U.S. comes involved in that, with the Cuban Missile Crisis and John F. Kennedy sending troops down, and what is well known as the Bay of Pigs it was a CIA invasion trying to take over intel from the communist government. And it just digresses from there as far as the U.S. trying to stop the trade within Cuba with the Embargo Act and different things like that.
Ms. McGinnis, to what degree do you think that this was simply a disagreement between countries who have different economic systems, or do you think the problems between the United States and Cuba were really part of a bigger global issue between the U.S. and the Soviet Union?
I think a lot of the issues, especially after like the Red Scare and everything like that, the United States has been very iffy in regards to interacting with Cuba because of the relationship with, or previous relationship with the Soviet Union and Russia and everything like that. But I think it kind of goes back farther to even to like the beginnings of Cuba, I guess you could say, whenever Spain signed them over to us. That's when a lot of issues with like Guantanamo Bay and things like that began. I think that like our stressful relations, however, can be zeroed in on different things, but I think a majority of it comes on with the global aspect and like the issues that we've had in the past with them.
Okay, so the U.S. to isolate from Cuba, they have in place embargoes on them so that trade cannot go in and out, and so that the diplomatic relations between Cuba and the U.S. are broken. And what this has done is it's basically isolated Cuba from the international trade community, because the U.S. being one of the biggest trade partners in the world, if they're not going to be allies with Cuba, then it's going to sever ties between them and other nations as well. So it's going to basically isolate them in the international trade community.
Jacob, can you also talk a little bit maybe about the problem with tourism and the ability of people to move back and forth between the two?
Yeah, well, tourism has always been a big thing in Cuba, especially since some nations, other than the United States, allow their people to go there. Um, it's one of the only industries they have. There's other things, they make rum and they do sugar, but tourism is a big thing. And a lot of people are hoping that with the normalization with Cuba, more Americans are going to go there and spend more of their money because America is one of the richest nations on the planet. So Cuba is just really hoping that's going to help them in that sense. And but you have to think, does Cuba really have the infrastructure in place to support American tourists, and are Americans going to want to go there in the first place?
What about the broader question of regional peace? Have there been any side effects with the problems between the United States and Cuba on any of the other countries in the world? It's open to anybody.
So as far as regional peace, since the end of the Cold War and ever since the problem with Alan Gross and the Cuban Five, there's been the relations between U.S. and Cuba have sort of simmered down, and as far as a region, we have been fairly peaceful as far as no wars, no conflicts other than prisoner exchange and refugee traffic, and that sort of thing.
So then why now? What's changed? Why is the United States and Cuba moving towards some degree of détente or normalization?
I believe it's because everyone is just tired of it. We see this as more of a thing of the past, a thing that happened during the Cold War, and certainly Obama wants to leave his mark, and he's already done several landmark things during his administration, and I believe more people are just wanting to get past this entire thing. We see it as something that's old and just a relic of the past, and we want to get through the Cold War and just get it out of our history.
You mentioned Obama. Are there any others who want some degree of normalization between the United States and Cuba? Maybe actors inside the United States, maybe actors outside of the United States?
Certainly there are people within Cuba who want us to be normalized. People who see that they can make money off of opening up. People within the United States who see it as an opportunity to bring democracy to the island, possibly. Because with normalization, we had the reopening of embassies, and with more common exchange going on, we're hoping maybe one day democracy can come to the island.
I've heard that it's been reported that this is next week or in 2 weeks, the Pope is going to be making his first visit to Cuba as sort of a stopover on his way to not only come to the United States, but to be the first pontiff to actually give an address to the United States Congress. Has the Pope played any role in normalization? Is there a reason why he might be interested in creating better ties between the United States and Cuba? Ms. McGinnis, do you have any ideas?
Well, I know in terms of like negotiating and mediating, whenever President Obama and Castro announced that they were going to be implementing more diplomatic relations and everything like that, the Pope actually played the role of the mediator, which is really important because it brings in like the global aspect and shows that it's not just two countries that are trying to work things out, that it's involving other people as well, which I think is really important. And kind of going off of that too, I know back in like I think it was 2013, the United Nations, the General Assembly, discussed how they wanted to condemn the embargo and things like that. And so I feel like by involving the Pope and involving these other nations, that we're taking that step in that direction to mend those relations and things like that, which I think is really important, especially with such a popular figure worldwide.
Are there any domestic forces who are in favor of normalization? Maybe actors who see that there might be some benefit to the American economy to bring about better relations between the United States and Cuba. Lucas, what do you think?
I would say that there definitely are people that would like this normalization in the United States because we have companies that could outsource workers and factories into Cuba that could possibly open up a wider range of economic growth, not for just them, but for the owners that may live in the U.S. And I feel like the normalization might be like better because it would allow for company to company to go back and forth. And obviously, regionally, if Cuba was reintegrated, it would help the North American Free Trade Act and stuff like that, possibly where everyone could come together and be more connected and improve our relations around the world, actually.
What about farmers? Are there any agricultural interests? And this is open to anybody. Are there any agricultural interests that might benefit particularly from better relations with Cuba? I've heard a lot of people mention, for example, that American cotton manufacturers may be able to benefit given the size of the clothing manufacturing industry in Cuba, or even maybe food suppliers like wheat or rice producers might have an easy market in Cuba since it doesn't necessarily produce most of its own food. Now, moving on maybe to a different question. Why would, if there are so many benefits, why would anyone be opposed to normalization between the United States and Cuba? Joseph, do you want to take that one?
So, obviously, there's a lot of benefits to normalization of Cuba and U.S., but there are, and actually the majority of Cubans are for this because they get the most benefit, but a lot of your conservatives and radical conservatives are still hanging on to the old way of thinking, which is Cuba's communist. Fidel Castro has been a very bad political leader for Cuba as far as human rights issues and economically speaking as well. But personally, I think it's time to move past that, and with all the benefits here.
But to follow up on that, do you think that the Communist Party benefits at all from being able to go back to the people and continually talking about why they should hate the Americans, how the Americans are mostly responsible for the problems that they face? Is there any kind of a political propaganda leverage that they may be afraid of losing should they normalize relations? What do you think?
Personally, once again, as far as the Communist Party goes, that's an age gone by. Yes, there's China and Russia, Vietnam, all these communist countries, but I feel like Cuba has been, there's been enough time to allot through that it's not an issue anymore.
Well, back to what Joseph was saying about conservatives in America being opposed, we used to have Cuba on a list that named them as sanctioning terrorism, and we've recently taken them off that list, but a lot of conservatives would like to see them put back on there, which Republicans are opposed to it, but historically Cubans in Miami in particular are a strong voting bloc for the Republican Party, and I believe that if they want to keep this up, they shouldn't be opposing normalization with Cuba so much.
So then there may be some electoral benefit to one political party or the other to maintaining opposition. That makes a certain amount of sense, especially if you consider the importance of Florida in American presidential elections. What about in the international community? Is there any reason why countries in the international community might be, or other agents in the international community might be opposed to normalization between the United States and Cuba? Ms. McGinnis, how about you?
I know that not just like communist parties in general, but the geographic region that Cuba's in, so Latin America. I know there's a lot of iffiness and kind of waywardness when it comes to relationships between Cuba and the United States. Throughout history, it's no doubt that the United States has been viewed as kind of maybe not necessarily a bully to other countries, for lack of a better word. But I know that we sometimes have the reputation of destabilizing a lot of countries. So I feel like perhaps some Latin American countries would be less likely to want this change and this initiative because it kind of, I don't want to say it would give us more power, but it kind of opens up that branch of communication and trade, anything like that, that perhaps those countries might not be too fond of. They may feel like they're losing Cuba to us or something like that in general. But yeah, I feel like definitely like Central America, Latin America, they might be more opposed to it than some other regions of the world.
When you mentioned those countries, would Venezuela be one of those countries you're talking about? Because
Yes.
I guess would Venezuela be the last communist country in the Western Hemisphere if Cuba and America normalized relations?
What was that? Could you repeat that? Sorry.
Sure. I was asking, you mentioned some countries might have problems with it. And that was just Venezuela specifically. It may be Venezuela as a socialist country might have particular exceptions to the United States and Cuba normalizing relations.
Yeah. Definitely, where they're more social, they might be less likely to, what's the word? When it comes to like the communist ideologies or like socialist ideologies, I know there are certain things that they may agree upon more than others, which is definitely one of the reasons why maybe Venezuela might be more likely to like or favor that relationship.
Okay, so Lucas, can you break this down for me? If I am the average American citizen and Cuba and the United States start to reestablish political ties, if they start to reestablish economic ties, what do I expect this will do to me? My personal life.
I would say that the normalization between the U.S. and Cuba won't affect the average American's life because it's going to be a while before we actually see the effects of it because it's not going to be one of those things that we're just going to run into. We're going to gradually go back into it to make sure that the necessary changes that I think should happen have happened, and we're going to make sure that Cuba is actually trying to change to the better and become a more like willing nation to work with others. So as an average American, I don't think we'll see it in our lifetime where it would affect us, but maybe like in the richer America's lives, they will see it because they will be able to outsource their money and resources to other people.
Okay, so what about the life of the average Cuban? Would I expect for them to see any real benefits from normalization?
I believe they will. Of course, you're going to have those individuals in Cuba who aren't going to benefit directly, but you're going to see more employment opportunities, hopefully, for Cubans in the future, and hopefully an increase in the average Cuban's income compared to what it is right now. Because hopefully, with the maybe one day the embargo will be lifted, and that will really help Cuba take off. Because with America being the largest economy, we're going to see more benefits going to Cuba. Because obviously we survived without them, but it was hard for them to really survive without us.
I agree. I definitely think that the life of a Cuban will be more impacted than it would be for the average American.
And not saying that Cuba hasn't survived, but they haven't thrived compared with if we'd had a normal relationship from the get-go. Because they definitely could have been a stronger trading partner being only 90 miles off the coast of Florida.
Definitely could have definitely been a benefit instead of something that was just there.
Yeah, in terms of other countries that might benefit, I know that we had put an embargo on, I think it was back in the 90s, it was the Helms-Burton Act. It put an embargo on other countries like trading with Cuba, and perhaps if all goes according to plan and everything goes all right, then other countries could benefit from this as well, because that embargo would be lifted. It wouldn't be so tense for other countries to trade with Cuba. So it kind of helps their diplomacy as well, I feel like, as well as their economic activity, because there's going to be that flow of communication or that flow of resources and goods between other countries as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the fact that you said that it would hurt other countries' relations with Cuba, because with the U.S. being such a big hegemon, especially of this region, is definitely going to affect how they are perceived, these smaller countries that may want to trade with Cuba by the U.S., and no one wants to be seen as the bad guy.
Definitely. And I think we need to be very aware if, like, the industries that are going to be moving into Cuba, however. We have the perception that everything will be okay, that our diplomatic relations will be all right and everything. But with the new industry, we have to make sure that the exploitation of the people, of the Cubans, isn't going to occur, because, as you know, human rights issues are very big in Cuba. That's one of the reasons why our relations were kind of iffy in the first place. So in terms of like harming other groups, that kind of thing, I think that we need to be very aware that there's always the possibility of like further exploitation of people, of their resources, that kind of thing. Because they've been out of the system for a little while, and so in terms of reintegrating, we have to make sure we remember this is going to be a gradual thing. It's not necessarily going to just happen overnight.
Right, right. Because with normalization comes this the American form of capitalism, and with that, we'll probably see industries wanting to export their labor from the United States to Cuba because it's quicker, and they know they might be able to get away with paying them less. So we want to make sure we're definitely watching that. And of course, current human rights issues in Cuba aren't up to par with what we would want them to be, and that's why a lot of liberals in the United States are kind of against normalization, because we haven't seen real significant progress in the area of human rights in Cuba in quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
And on that note, it's interesting to see the tourism, as far as the industries go. Tourism is a big factor in Cuba as well as in Florida. You know, in the 90s and early 2000s, you saw a lot of refugees from Cuba coming up. And if we lift the embargo, if the relations are restored to a diplomatic level, it could definitely benefit Florida's tourism industry as well, and we'll see more Cubans coming into America for vacation. I mean, Florida has Disney World and Universal and all these theme parks, and not to mention beaches and resorts. So it would definitely benefit Florida as well.
Yes, in the long term, I can see as Cuba becomes more prosperous, Cubans are going to want to come to the United States and bring their spending power with them.
But I
Absolutely.
also could see it being the exact same way, whereas like maybe people from the U.S. might want to go down to Cuba, and that would attract tourism to them, and maybe bring money into their economy also. But we also have to think of the bad effects that might come of this whole reintegration thing. Is the fact that there's Cubans that have escaped from Cuba into the U.S., and that some have not gained their citizenship yet. And with the reopening ties between Cuba and the U.S., then the Cubans that haven't gained citizenship can be deported back to their home country now, and that's definitely going to be something that's detrimental to them after they learn to live a life here in the U.S.
Definitely, and that is one negative consequence of this whole process of normalizing ourselves with Cuba again.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that there are different, I guess you could say, necessary actions that the different actors are going to have to take in order to actually make sure that these diplomatic relations are going according to plan, that they're staying peaceful, that new bans and things like that we don't kind of relapse and fall back into those things. In terms of integrating back into like the international community, do you guys think that they're going to have to like change a lot of policies, or do you think that they can still keep doing what they're doing?
What was your question again, Sarah?
Sorry. In terms of like integrating back into the international community, do you guys think that they're just going to have a total overhaul of their policies, or do you think some things can stay the same and others have to change, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so Cuba has been a long isolated entity in the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, they haven't had many international ties at all, other than the relations with other communist countries throughout the 1980s, 1990s, and with Venezuela in current times as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how Cuba reintegrates, and if they form many ties with other international entities as well. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, things that would benefit their economy if these relations and they start branching out with their influence, and it could really have the potential to grow Cuba's economy and politically speaking as well.
But I definitely think we can all agree that with this reintegration, that there's going to be trying times, and that the Cubans have to be willing to have their eyes open, and so does the U.S. also, not just the Cubans. That there's going to be times when we're all going to struggle, and that we're going to have to work through those problems together. Because I mean, they have two currencies and stuff, so they're definitely going to have to learn how to be able to translate their currency back into the international scheme and do it in a way that's fair for them and fair for the international world around them.
Yes, because being isolated for so long and not really knowing the benefits of foreign investment, it may take them a while to see that, but hopefully they catch on pretty fast and they realize that foreign investments will probably be the best thing for the country. Although maybe not for the party, but for the people.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
Definitely. And I also think, too, like, Cuba itself needs to keep in mind that there are different avenues that they can take and that we can also take in order to make this shift occur. Because as we've talked about, like, reintegrating is not an easy task. You can't just show up one day and be like, oh, I want to be a part of the international financial institutions. There are a lot of different factors that kind of come into play. As I mentioned earlier, like sometimes it'll have to be gradual. Maybe they just kind of have to build their confidence and like slowly work their way in, or even just applying for membership back into the international community in terms of like their financial and like economic institutions. That I want to be more direct, and I guess immediate, like that would be one of the paths that they could take. But in terms of the United States acting, a few of us were talking the other day, and it's interesting how like President Obama, he could even kind of take the initiative on that. So he could like make a public statement or just kind of talk to various world leaders and kind of help pull Cuba back into the swing of things. And not only would that benefit them, as we talked about, it would benefit the United States as well, because it kind of helps shape our foreign policy after, because we know like, our foreign policy isn't the best as it could be or has the potential to be, and that could kind of help steer both countries in the right direction whenever it comes to that.
So one final wrap-up question. We're just about out of time. Do you feel that Cuba has anything to fear from normalization with the United States? Should it be worried about the Cuban economy being overwhelmed by our economy? Do you think the United States has anything to fear about Cuba? And we'll just kind of go around the table and let everybody address that question.
Okay, I would definitely say that Cuba shouldn't have to be worried about the America's economy and stuff like that, because the America should be willing to step in and help the integration process more easier and more smooth, because it's not just a benefit for Cuba, it's a benefit for America also, and we shouldn't overwhelm them with our ways of doing things, because I mean, I'm an advocate that there's always a better way, so if we can work together in finding a way that's better, then that's what we need to do.
True, but I believe the possibility is there for the American economy to either unknowingly or purposefully overwhelm the Cuban economy, because that's kind of just what we do. We're just so big, and going in there after decades, like 5 decades of not being there, it may be a little overwhelming for Cubans to kind of get a grasp of our style and our way of doing things.
Yes, I agree with Jacob. It's definitely going to take a period of time and diplomatic efforts to renormalize Cuba and U.S. relations, because it has been so long. There has been so many years of bad relations there. But it's definitely a benefit to both Cuba and America's economy, as well as the world also.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone has said. I think it's important to remember, like, this is a reintegration process, and individuals, whether it's one country or multiple countries, they can't always make these changes alone. And as Jacob and everyone else has said, like, the United States, we are sometimes like a looming presence, kind of always there, that kind of thing. And so it's important that this is also a partnership. It's not just one way. We need to remember that we're there to help, and if they do get overwhelmed, kind of help bridge that gap, kind of help them see the better future, the better plans, that kind of thing.
Well, thank you very much. It looks like we are just about out of time. I want to thank all of my panelists for participating in this inaugural session of the Fall 2015 CU Senior Seminar discussion on global politics and issues. Anyone who is interested can be sure to check us out at our website at panorama.weebly.com. And again, thank you, and we hope to see you next time.